Hey everybody, it's Aaron here with Get Your Geek On. We're still doing our Get Your Ghost On for the month of October. And I'm here with Peter again, and we're bringing you another amazing interview. And at that point, I'll pass it off to Peter.
How's it going, everybody? It's coming to us live from here in San Antonio. We have noted cryptozoologist Ken Gerhard. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Hey, Peter. How are you doing?
Not too bad, my friend. Good to see you again.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate your support and interest.
Awesome. Well, for starters, what exactly is cryptozoology?
Yeah, so the name cryptozoology is translated from Latin. Crypto means hidden, and zoology pertains to the study of animals. So the technical translation is search for hidden animals or study of hidden animals. People ask, well, what do you mean by a hidden animal? Well, it's an animal that it's hidden from science. It hasn't been zoologically described. So unknown animals, basically. And a lot of times that takes me into, kind of these romantic, legendary creatures like Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, Mothman, and a whole host of other because a lot of those animals, we think in the field of cryptozoology might actually exist, and they're not monsters per se, but just very remarkable unknown animals.
Fascinating. How did you get interested in this field?
Well, it's been a lifelong interest of mine. I didn't have a sighting or anything like that, no epiphany that got me on the track. It was more just growing up. My father was a forestry professor, so we spent a lot of time in the outdoors, and I loved creatures and animals. We used to collect snakes and salamanders, and I had a pet alligator. And
what? You had a pet alligator? Sorry.
Well, it was a caiman, which is a species of alligator, a smaller alligator.
Okay.
But we had to give it away to the zoo eventually. It got too big for its tank, and we didn't want to buy a bigger tank. And I also loved monsters and monster movies growing up, Godzilla movies and all that kind of stuff. So when I first saw a TV show about Bigfoot back when I was 8 or 9 years old, it was just, it flipped a switch. I thought it was so cool that there were these sort of monsters out there that were also possibly animals or creatures. So that was, it's just been a lifelong interest and passion. But I do have to point out that my mother was a big influence. She was a very adventurous person, and she would tell me stories about the Yeti and the Mothman, and kind of took me to the library to look for books on Bigfoot. And we also traveled quite a bit, and had some pretty amazing vacations when I was a kid. We went to South America, camped along the Amazon River, Machu Picchu, Galapagos Islands. Then we hiked across Australia, climbed Mount Ayers Rock, went to Africa, Asia, so all these places. And so wherever I went, and I traveled as a kid, I would hear, the local legends. Wherever you go, there's always some legendary creature that people talk about. And then, but when I was 15 years old, my family vacationed at Loch Ness in Scotland, so that was a pretty big deal to me. And I was about 15 years old, but I spent the better part of my time kind of, sitting by the lake with a movie camera and talking to locals and kind of trying to investigate the monster legend. So that's it. It's just been a lifelong thing. And I always tell people I feel very blessed. I've had opportunities to travel and, appeared on some TV shows, and I've written books, and, now I do lectures and things. So it's really just my life's passion.
That's amazing. Well, what TV shows have you been on?
Well, I co-hosted a series on History Channel called Missing in Alaska. That was back in 2015. And that covered a lot of cryptozoology, but we also dabbled in UFOs and ghosts a little bit on a couple of episodes. And then I've been on a TV show called Monster Quest a few times, and a show called In Search of Monsters on the Travel Channel last year. And been on a couple shows with William Shatner, his new one, Unexplained, and an older one. And Ancient Aliens, America Unearthed, and believe it or not, Shipping Wars, which was kind of a weird thing, but kind of a mistake, probably looking back. But so yeah, I've appeared on quite a few TV shows. Monsters and Mysteries in America is another good one. Destination America. So.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah. So I've been very fortunate because it obviously opens a lot of doors when you're on a TV show. Sometimes you get another TV show down the road, or a public appearance or something. So it all helps me out.
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned that you've done a lot of traveling, and a lot of you've done. You've been out looking for cryptoids. So tell us about some of the expeditions you've done looking for some of these cryptoids.
Well, one of my favorites was in 2004. I put together an expedition to go down to the nation of Belize, which of course is in Central America, and we were searching for evidence of two cryptids. One is called the Sisamite or Sisamito, which is a kind of a Bigfoot type thing, Sasquatch. And then they also have a little kind of a pygmy-sized version, like a hairy man-like creature that's real small, and it's known as the Duende. And so we were up in the Maya Mountains, Coxcomb and Chicabol jungle, some really amazing jungle areas up there that are very uninhabited. And, we found some small footprints that were human-like, and we cast those. They weren't the best in terms of, the definition of the toes and things, but that was kind of the most exciting thing that we found. They were very small. Could have, admittedly could be a small person, but you have to understand that this is a pretty remote area. There really aren't many people there, and definitely no barefoot people, I would think, because you have a lot of poisonous snakes like fertile ant snakes and scorpions, things like that. So it's not somewhere I wouldn't think you'd be walking around barefoot. And these footprints also had very pointy heels, which was kind of interesting because people have described that with regard to the Duende, that the Duende has pointy heels. Also, I've been to Mexico a couple times, investigated a Mothman type creature down in near the city of Monterrey, in a place called Huasteca in the Sierra Madre Mountains, which is very mysterious and remote. I've investigated the Chupacabra in Mexico and a couple of different places where livestock had been attacked. And I did an expedition to France where it was a very old case, but we researched an old legend of something called the Beast of Gévaudan, which was like a werewolf type creature that attacked and killed many people back in the 1700s. And that was on a TV show I did for History Channel as well called The Real Wolf Man. And sometimes they show that around Halloween. So those are some of my favorites. And of course, the time I spent in Alaska was pretty amazing. Investigated a lot of things up there: Bigfoot, Thunderbirds, lake monsters, giant wolves, things like that. So, but yeah, obviously haven't had much of an opportunity to travel much this year. As with most people, kind of put my life on hold, but hopefully to get out there again soon.
Right. A while back when I'd met you, you had a cast of a Bigfoot. This is from the old 67 Patterson footage, if I'm not mistaken. This is a copy of it?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, how big, more or less, if you were to put that in a shoe size, more or less to kind of give a lot of our viewers out here, what shoe size would that probably be? Because that's not a 12 or anything.
Well, I'm not much of a shoe person, but it's the footprint is 14 and a half inches long. And I've got it right here in front of me, so I'll measure the width because I don't remember, but it's across the broadest part of the foot. It's about 6 inches across. Now, the average Bigfoot or Sasquatch footprint, and keep in mind there have been thousands of alleged Bigfoot Sasquatch prints that have been found throughout North America for decades. They fit a very similar type. They look like human feet, but they're not exactly like human feet. They don't have an arch. They're much broader. Toes are smaller and things like that. But the average Bigfoot track is 15 and a half inches long and about 7.2 inches wide, which is a pretty wide foot. There have been tracks found as long as 18, 19 inches. because the one that I have is only 14 and a half that we're talking about for Patterson film, it's kind of interesting because the subject in the Patterson Bigfoot film looks like it's a female. She has breasts, she's big and hairy, but when she turns to face the camera, her breasts are very evident. And so we know she's a female, or we assume she's a female. And so just as with humans and other apes and primates, males are bigger, right? We're what's called sexually dimorphic, where you have differences between the sexes within a species. In the case of Homo sapiens, males are bigger, like 15%, and that applies to different apes too. So it makes sense that Patty's footprint would be a little smaller than the average, if that makes sense.
Right.
About 14 and a half inches, because even though she looks like a full-grown female, she's probably smaller than a big male Bigfoot or Sasquatch.
Huh.
That is fascinating. You said you've obviously looked for several Bigfoots and Sasquatches before, but can you elaborate more about what you would do on an actual expedition and how you prepare for one of them, or what kind of equipment you would bring?
Well, I have a lot of friends that do ghost hunting, and I find that interesting too. But we use a lot of the same toys. Some of the things that we've used for a long time in the Bigfoot field are obviously like trail cameras, which are motion-activated infrared cameras that you set up on different trails and places in the woods, and you're hoping something will walk in front of it. I don't know if ghost hunters use those as much, but I know they use audio recorders, and that's another thing we use in the Bigfoot field, digital audio recorders with microphones and things, trying to capture potential sounds or vocalizations. One of the newest, hottest technologies in the Bigfoot field in recent years has been the FLIR, or thermal imaging, which is another thing I think ghost hunters use to try to find different traces of energies and things like that. But, we're also looking for Bigfoot, which we know is a warm-blooded animal, and so we're out in the cold woods at night, and you're hoping that, any animal that you see is going to show up and give you a signature. Drones are becoming more popular if you can afford them. I don't know, maybe that's not a ghost hunting thing, at least the Bigfoot field. If you put a camera on a drone, you can cover a lot more ground, although they're pretty loud. So, those are kinds of the basics. But Bigfoot is, one of the things I write about in my new book is that your worst Bigfoot expedition is like a nice camping trip. So even if you don't find anything, see anything, hear anything, you're still out in the woods enjoying the beauty of nature and usually having a pretty good time. We assume that Bigfoot is nocturnal. So on a standard Bigfoot expedition, we spend our daylight hours kind of just scouting the area, looking for footprints or, markers, indicators that there might be Bigfoot in the area. And then at night, typically, you kind of stay put in your campsite or wherever you're lurking, and you might do some call blasting or wood knocking or just listen. I do what's called smell blasting, where I start cooking bacon in the middle of the night, things like that, just kind of put good smells onto the woods and see what'll come in. And, it's also kind of most researchers, I think, in the field agree that, you don't typically find Bigfoot. Bigfoot finds you. So a lot of I've never seen one, Peter, but I'm convinced I've heard them vocalize a few times, and usually that happens like when you're just sitting around the campfire at night in the middle of the night, and something will make a crazy scream or a call or something that you can't identify. And so, we assume that they know we're there, and they're just kind of letting us know that they're there, something like that. So
yeah,
no one can resist bacon, though.
Yeah. There was a huge. I remember hearing the story as a kid. There was a big sighting of an unknown flying creature in San Antonio in the 70s, and you've written extensively. You talked about that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons I moved to San Antonio from Houston years ago, because at the time I was actively investigating this cryptid. The creature in the 1970s was given the name Big Bird by the newspapers, and yes, they were kind of playing off Sesame Street, but what people were describing was much scarier than the Big Bird on the kids show. The first sightings kind of started at the end of 1975 and the beginning of 1976. And most of those actually started down in the valley. So you had sightings around Harlingen, San Benito, Raymondville, Brownsville, some of those areas, and a whole bunch of sightings in, around that time period. And that's when the name Big Bird made the newspapers. People were typically describing something that looked like a big bird with feathers, dark feathers, huge wingspan, anywhere from 12 or 15 to 20 feet across, which is, like 5 times bigger than an eagle. You can imagine that, 3 to 5 times bigger. Hooked beak, like an eagle or a vulture. And so basically like a big vulture-looking thing, but enormous. And there were many sightings around that time. And then they kind of migrated up closer to San Antonio, places like Poteet. And in February of 1976, there were 3 school teachers. This made all the local newspapers here in San Antonio, but there were 3 school teachers in the south side of San Antonio. They were driving to work one morning in different cars, and they all pulled over to the side of the road to watch these 2 giant prehistoric-looking birds with 20-foot wingspans that were kind of hovering over the cow field. And they actually said they looked very much like pterodactyls, which are not birds at all, but reptiles. But that's a whole other can of worms. But that made the local newspapers, and the San Antonio Zoo, which I'm affiliated with now, they were being asked about, what could this thing be? There was a reward put out, and then there was a guy that put out a reward for the capture of Big Bird or whatever, and then there was pushback on that from the wildlife officials that said, "No, hold on, you can't just put out a bounty on an on an animal. We have to, might be endangered or something." So that was it. So, most people have heard about the 1970s or remember the 1970s sightings if you're a little older. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the sightings have continued. And so I've interviewed many people that have claimed to have sightings. Probably the most recent one, it's been a few years, but there was a sighting over New Braunfels, I think in 2017 or 18. That may have been the most recent one that I'm aware of. And there have been some over San Antonio in 2013, 2010, Medina Lake, 2009, and so on and so forth. And some of them, believe it or not, some of these big bird sightings have been like within the city. Like the 2010 sighting that I investigated took place over there on a street called Elderberry, which is over off of west side of 1604, and I don't remember the street, but there's been a sighting at Seneca and Evers, Chavano Park. I mean, people have seen these things flying over the city, or not all the time, they're pretty rare, but so I don't know what these things are. But they are sighted all over South Texas, and there are also Native American legends of things called thunderbirds, which are giant birds that were, you find in different Native American traditions and legends and totems and things. So possibly there's a connection.
And that is really, really fascinating. One thing, when you're dealing with stuff like with cryptozoology and study of UFOs, ghosts, and so forth, you're always going to come across skeptics. Now, how do you handle skeptics when somebody says, "Oh, it's just somebody walking around in a gorilla suit as Bigfoot," or something like? How do you address skeptics?
Well, I totally understand. One of the first things I think most people that are interested in this stuff realize is that, you're in the minority as far as, for example, with regard to Bigfoot, there have been 2 recent surveys that have indicated that only about 18 to 22% of the population that Bigfoot can exist. So, 4 out of 5 people, doesn't mean they don't like Bigfoot. I love Bigfoot on TV commercials and movies and things, but 4 out of 5 people think Bigfoot could not exist. Only 1 in 5 people will admit, well, you know what, maybe they do, maybe it's possible. So, most people are probably skeptical. But another thing I'd like to say is that I am actually one of the more skeptical cryptozoologists, or at least, you know, in the cryptid field. I'm constantly debunking things that are, you know, obviously like misinterpretations or hoaxes or fake videos or whatever. I always look for the most logical explanation. If someone, you know, unless someone says they had a daylight sighting of a Bigfoot that walked right out in front of them, and there's no doubt, you know, what they saw. But if it's, you know, there was something big moving in the woods and I heard it, and, you know, some footprints that are found might belong to a bear or something else. So, I mean, a human that's walking around barefoot. So, I mean, you have to always look at all this stuff kind of objectively and skeptically. And I think the greatest challenge to any investigator, whether you're in the field of cryptozoology or paranormal or UFOs or whatever, is remaining objective as an investigator and not letting your emotions and biases kind of guide your opinion. You know, I think that's the biggest trap that I see for most investigators, is they want so bad, you know, for these things to exist, that they assume that, you know, things, sometimes they're more generous in terms of how they interpret things. And, you know, I get it. You know, if you go on a ghost hunt and you're spending all night in a haunted house, you don't want nothing to happen. You don't want to go home and say, well, that was just sat around for 9 hours, 10 hours, and nothing happened. You want to have at least one experience where, well, he heard this, or this moved, or, you know, and I'm not trying to come down on paranormal, because I'm open-minded to all of that phenomenon. But, you know, I think that's just a human tendency, is we have something called confirmation bias, right? Where if you go to a place, you think it's haunted, you think there's a Bigfoot, you're going to kind of expect to experience something. So that's kind of my advice for investigators, is, you know, try to remove your emotions from the process as much as possible, and just look at it, you know, from different points of view, and be skeptical. Now, my biggest problem with some skeptics, not all, but some skeptics, I think also are biased. And they're so biased against any of this stuff being possible that they, you know, they just reject everything. And sometimes they come up with some ridiculous theories to explain things that are just inexplicable, you know. But I do deal with that sometimes. And I have friends that are, you know, leading skeptics that write skeptical magazines and articles. So, you know, I like to hear their point of view and stuff too. But I don't worry about the skeptics so much as the hoaxers. I think that's the bigger problem, because when people hoax, it makes us all look bad.
Exactly.
Yeah, because anybody who's got any kind of who's really good with a computer can pull off just about anything nowadays.
Oh yeah,
fortunately.
That's true. Yeah.
And getting back to your thing about skepticism, having done ghost tours and investigations, what I used to tell people on my old tours was, we don't have any ghosts here on tour that are on payroll, because they don't always show up when we need them to. So we would have fired them by now. So, but another thing I was going to ask you here is, you mentioned the Chupacabra, and there's been some sightings that have been down in Cuero, and you've actually examined one of some of the remains of some of these things.
Yes, I've examined the remains of a half dozen animals that were called Chupacabras. Now, generally in the field of cryptozoology, we're acknowledging that these Texas animals are not Chupacabras, at least not in the sense that, you know, people think of the original Puerto Rican version, which was like this two-legged, goblin-like reptilian animal with spikes on its back and then giant eyes and things like that. The creatures in Texas have all been canids, dogs. You know, you can tell that almost immediately by looking at the skulls and the teeth, but they've all been DNA tested too. But here's the thing. They're not typical dogs. They look really weird. And the first one ever that turned up was actually in Elmendorf, just south of San Antonio, in 2004. It was called the Elmendorf Beast at first, and then it became a Chupacabra. And then you had some pop up in other places in Texas, Pollock, Texas, and then down in Cuero. And there have been some up near Fayetteville, the hot spot north of Houston, down near Rosenberg. So there seem to be pockets of these things, and I've seen one myself a couple of years ago, finally at night, and they're either coyotes or feral dogs, domestic dogs, or hybrids of different dog species, coyotes, wolves, domestic dogs. But they're almost virtually hairless, very little hair, sometimes a little bit on top. They have a bluish-gray skin that's very hard, like an elephant-type hide. They have very weird teeth, sometimes super long fangs or other weird dentition. They have long claws. They have sometimes disproportionate limbs where their backs are sloped forward or backwards. And some even have these weird growths on their backsides and blue eyes. So they have a lot of abnormalities. Now, people have tried to describe them as mangy coyotes, which might have some truth to it. Mange, of course, is a mite that gets under the skin of dogs and causes their hair to fall out. But, the type of hairlessness or the degree of hairlessness we're seeing on these animals is far worse than any case of mange that anyone has ever seen before. I mean, these animals are almost hairless. They have, usually mangy coyotes will have patches of hair here and there. And then you also have the other physical abnormalities. So there are a few different theories. One is that, yes, it is mange, but maybe it's like a super strain of mange, and there are other factors that are causing it to go overboard. The other possibility is that these are hybrids, or that the genes from hairless breeds of dogs, and people often talk about the Mexican Cholo, which is a kind of a hairless-looking dog from Mexico. That something like that could have started breeding with coyotes and passed on this hairless gene. And then the last theory, which is kind of one I've been advocating in recent years, is that it's pollution, because a lot of these hot spots where these so-called Texas Chupacabras have been found have all been very close to coal-fired power plants. And these coal-fired power plants emit like 7,000 tons of sulfur dioxide into the air each year, lead, mercury, uranium. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of toxins, and I think that some of these toxins might be affecting these wild dog populations, either creating mutations, genetic deformities, or possibly screwing up their immunity system to where they're, just really vulnerable to things. So, but they don't drink blood. That's the one thing that we haven't. The one thing I think that would qualify them as a chupacabra, and I'm sure everyone out there that's listening knows what a chupacabra is supposed to do, which is drink blood like a vampire. There's no evidence that these animals in Texas do that. There have been some claims that they, that these chickens and other animals have been killed and exsanguinated, drained of their blood, but that hasn't been scientifically proven. The one last thing I'll say is there's an interesting theory that maybe because these animals are so sickly or whatever, that they are craving certain minerals in blood, like iron. And so when they kill livestock, that maybe they're not as interested in eating the flesh as drinking the blood and kind of getting a quick dose of these different minerals and things. But it's just a theory. So
Yeah, that's fascinating.
That really is.
And they wouldn't be sucking the blood out; they would probably be biting the animal and then just licking the blood up.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So.
Interesting. Well, since it's October, and of course you're being Get Your Ghost On, and I'm pretty sure you get busy around this time of the month, this time of the year, with everything.
Yep.
What is your favorite Halloween movie?
My favorite Halloween movie?
Yeah.
Well, Halloween. I mean, not to be too obvious, but I love Rob Zombie. I love his music. Yes. He's a great showman. He's got some awesome music, but I'm not real in love with his remakes of Halloween. I think the original John Carpenter was a masterpiece, and considering they filmed that like in a week for $30,000, and it's like one of the highest grossing movies with the best soundtrack, and it's a masterpiece. It's so, and I think about all the copycat movies that it launched, but my favorite movie of all time is Alien, the original Alien, which
Yes.
I can still watch all the time, and I think that's again, it's just a masterpiece in terms of filmmaking and horror and suspense. And but man, there's so many good ones. I love all kinds of horror movies, monster movies. So, I mean, I could probably list dozens, if not hundreds, that I'm in love with. So
Yeah.
Okay. If you could pick one monster, whether it be any of one of the ones that you've investigated, or even a movie monster, to sit down and just like interview and just talk to, which one would it be?
presuming they can talk, right?
Right.
That's a good question.
Right.
Huh. Which monster movie would I talk to? Never I'd learn something. I don't think Bigfoot can really communicate except maybe saying, ooka ooka, suck suck. There. So I don't know if that would be very productive. So
Well,
I'm looking for thinking more of a sentient monster, right? Someone that has an
Anyone. It's
intelligent mind.
saying that Bigfoot became sentient, or Nessie became sentient, and you could have salmon or something together, or
Yeah, okay. You could do some translation or something, huh?
We'll get a translator in.
Well,
Don't worry.
Well, Dracula would be pretty interesting. I mean, there's a
Right.
guy that's lived for, thousands of years or 1,000 years or whatever. And, I don't know if I'd want to sit too close to him, but I'd love to, pick Dracula's brain and, see what's been going on through the centuries. That would be interesting.
Well, if you do have sit down with Dracula, make sure you have some salsa with a lot of garlic in it.
There you go.
There we go. But again, Ken, thank you very much for coming in, and we hopefully we get to see you again, and come. You'll always be welcome on the show.
Oh, well, guys, I appreciate it. I had a blast. You had some great questions, and I definitely enjoyed speaking with you. I'll be speaking at I'm not sure exactly when this is going to air, but I'm going to be speaking at the Texas Bigfoot Conference in Jefferson, Texas next weekend on the 17th. And I'll also be appearing at the San Antonio Zoo later this month on Saturdays and Sundays, talking about, we have a Chupacabra exhibit at the San Antonio Zoo. It's pretty cool. People want to come down, and I do a little talk and talk about some of this stuff too. So
that's awesome.
Nice.
I'll have to come by and check that out. Again, everybody, thanks for thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Again, everyone, remember, get your ghost on this month for Get Your Geek On. We have our interviews here, and of course, all of our investigations are up this month. So go check those out. And again, Ken, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Oh, it was definitely an honor, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Have a good one.
Happy Halloween, everyone.
All right. Okay.